Welcome to Friday's edition of COVID-19. I'm Min San-hee. Today, May 15th, is Teachers' Day here in Korea, a day to voice our gratitude to teachers for their dedication to teaching the country's future plans. Yet classrooms today remain empty in light of the pandemic, reminding us yet again of the value of the many things we have taken for granted. Here now are Kwon So-ah and Noah Ram with the headlines before we delve into yet another area that has been positively affected by the pandemic, though. So we'll start with you. It's been a tough week because of the outbreak in Itaewon. Tell us the latest there.
Yes, it has been a tough week. There have been much more COVID-19 tests confirmed this week than in the past weeks, and that is because authorities are focusing on massive contact tracing to track down anyone who might have contracted the virus at those Itaewon clubs and bars, the main hotspots of this latest cluster infection. So let's take a look at the latest government updates. We have 27 new cases reported today, and out of these 27, 17 were related to the Itaewon case. And now our total number has surpassed 11,000. And meanwhile, the death toll remains at 260, while 937 people are still in quarantine and 9,821 have fully recovered. And that means that the recovery rate is now at 89%, so almost 90%. Meanwhile, compared to a week ago, we had less than half of the number of new cases we had today. If you see on May 8th, that was last Friday, we had 12 new cases, but then the number started to surge to 18, and then over the weekend we had figures in the 30s, and now we are in the late 20s.
Right, so hopefully we'll see those numbers fall again in the near future. The government on this Friday is stressing for much public caution and cooperation this weekend.
Right, the government is taking all-out efforts to find anyone who could have contracted the virus from this Itaewon case, but emphasized the nation's people must cooperate. Health and Welfare Minister Bang Neung-woo called on immediate reporting of suspicious COVID-19 cases, and that despite the tense situation due to the Itaewon infection, if the nation's people thoroughly follow social distancing measures, Korea will win the long battle against the virus. According to the Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasures Headquarters, inspections of nightlife, entertainment and similar facilities have been strengthened, and it also called on multi-use facilities such as indoor sports facilities and also cinemas to abide by quarantine guidelines. So businesses as well as individuals' active participation in the so-called everyday life quarantine measures cannot be stressed enough, especially as we are heading into the weekend. So how about we take a look at those everyday life quarantine guidelines? We see them here. Please stay home for 3 to 4 days if you feel sick and if you show any symptoms of the coronavirus, and also stay 2 arms length away from others. Wash your hands for 30 seconds. That's around singing happy birthday twice, and also coughing in sleeves. Also ventilate twice a day and disinfect surfaces that you touch regularly. And the last point we have here is stay psychologically close to family and friends, which means physical distance. So phone calls or video calls would be an alternative to visiting your parents or other elderly people, for instance. And as mentioned in an earlier briefing, the special committee that's in charge of these quarantine guidelines is continuously reviewing these relaxed social distancing measures. So that means they can be changed along the road based on any feedback from experts, or also if the situation changes.
Right, so meanwhile, the global death toll, I understand, has surpassed the 300,000 mark.
Right, according to figures compiled by Johns Hopkins University, more than 300,000 people have died in COVID-19 related deaths as of Thursday, 5 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. That's 135 days since the first case was reported in Wuhan City in China's Hubei province on December 31st last year. Fatalities in the U.S. account for around 28% of the global death toll, with around 87,000 deaths, followed by the UK and Italy with more than 33,000 and 31,000 respectively. With some 27,000 deaths, France has a mortality rate of almost 19%. Now, while another concerning milestone has been recorded, experts believe due to the various different ways of reporting the real number of infections as well as fatalities fatalities may be far higher. Meanwhile, Qatar has been found to be one of the countries with the highest number of COVID-19 cases when it comes to the proportion to population. The Middle Eastern country has more than 28,000 accumulated cases with a population of 2.75 million, meaning slightly more than 1% of the total population is infected. Over 1,730 new cases were reported on Thursday local time. And here's an overview of the major coronavirus outbreaks around the world. The U.S. has more than 1.4 million cases. Again, almost 87,000 is the death toll. And Spain has a death toll of over 27,000. That's also similar in France. And Brazil's total number of infections stands at over 203,000, while just the day before it was at 189,000. And meanwhile, the total number of COVID-19 cases across the globe stands at over 4.4 million. Let's take a look at our map here, with over 303,000 deaths as of around noon Korea time, and about 1.6 million people have fully recovered. And since we've been talking about this high death toll and also so many cases around the world, I just wanted to end on a brighter note. It looks like in Russia, a 100-year-old woman has recovered from coronavirus, and she was actually discharged from hospital on her 100th birthday.
That is good to know. Thank you. So I'll come back to you for the domestic updates after the briefing.
All right.
Today's Teachers' Day, as I said at the beginning of the program, but it's quite a different atmosphere because of COVID-19.
That's right. This is a day when we usually see students giving out flowers or letters or handmade gifts to the teachers in class. But since schools are closed now, teachers had to settle with video songs and postings at empty classrooms. Now, newly appointed teachers, meanwhile, are feeling a bit left out as they haven't even been able to meet their students yet because the start of the school year has been delayed so far. And meanwhile, parents are feeling more anxious about sending their kids to private education institutions after some instructors there were infected. Now, what's worrying is that parents are also stigmatizing foreign English teachers, these foreign nationals coming in to teach English here in Korea. They feel that since Itaewon attracts many foreigners, there is an increased risk of infection. Now, even though institutions are assuring parents that teachers who haven't been clubbing in their institutes, the assurances are falling on deaf ears, unfortunately. And to address these concerns, the Seoul Metropolitan Government says it will begin its own emergency inspection starting today through next month. It will focus on English kindergartens and private academies that specialize in preparing kids for their college entrance exams.
Meanwhile, in Bangladesh, a migrant camp housing refugees is reporting its first case of COVID-19.
That's right. The coronavirus has been detected at one of the camps in southern Bangladesh that is home to more than 1 million Rohingya refugees. Now, an ethnic Rohingya refugee and a local person tested positive for COVID-19. Now, this is raising fears of rapid spread through other camps as well. Health experts have been warning for some time that the virus could race through the sprawling, unsanitary camps because the conditions there aren't that hygienic. These places have been home to the refugees since they fled a military offensive in Myanmar more than 2 years ago. Now, the 2 patients are being treated at a local clinic inside the area, and the patients' contacts are being traced for quarantine and testing. And local authorities are also stepping up prevention measures and testing throughout the camps as well.
Right. Now, COVID-19 has dealt a huge blow to global trade, and I hear the head of the World Trade Organization is poised to step down.
That's right. Roberto Azevedo says he'll step down a year earlier than planned in August. His term was meant to end in August 2021, but he says he'll leave the post a year earlier. Azevedo said his early departure was a, quote, personal decision that was in the best interests of the organization. The surprise move comes as the trade body struggles to rein in global tensions in trade, as well as coordinate responses to the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, the announcement also comes at a crucial moment for the global economy, as we all now know, because of the pandemic. Global trade has slumped and the world is braced for its worst economic downturn since the Great Depression in the 1930s. The WTO has also been under intense criticism from the United States. President Trump has accused the body of treating America unfairly and that it strayed from its purpose to liberalize and protect markets. He was referring to the current US-China trade war at the moment, thinking that the WTO is more favorable to China. And Washington's dispute with the WTO has seen it block the appointment of the organization's top court judges since December 2019. Now, this means the WTO has too few officials to rule on major trade disputes between countries.
I see. All right, Aram, thank you for that. We'll see you again on Monday. It's a little after 2 in the afternoon here in Korea, and we are poised to join the regular afternoon briefing on COVID-19. Now, there are calls for much caution this weekend for those at educational, sports or religious facilities, as the recent outbreak in Itaewon has led to transmissions, that is, from tutors to students who later attended church services as well. The total number of infections linked to the Itaewon outbreak stands at 148 as of early Friday. Meanwhile, Korea's total now has surged past the 11,000 mark. Health authorities. We have the briefing now. I'll come back to you with Soa later.
정은경 본부장 설명이 있겠습니다.
Let us now begin our regular briefing for May 15th, Friday. As of today, we have 27 new patients, and the total number of confirmed cases now stands at 11,018. And this includes 1,150 imported cases from overseas. 59 more people have been released, and a total of 9,821 have been discharged following full recovery, and a total of 937 are in quarantine undergoing treatment. And out of the 27 new cases, 5 were the imported cases, while 22 were community transmission. And 1 was from Americas, 1 from Europe, and 2 from Pakistan, and 1 from UAE. And as for the 22 community transmissions, for the club case, we have 17 related to that, and 1 in relation to the Hongdae case, as well as 3 newly confirmed cases who are the contacts of the people who have already been confirmed cases. And as for the Hongdae and 1 person of the Seoul case, we are still doing the epidemiological investigation. And out of the 17 people who are in relation to the club, 7 are visitors to the club, and 10 were the visitors, were the contacts of the already confirmed cases. And also, as of now, we have 5 more people who have been newly confirmed, and a total of 153 people have been confirmed in relation to the Itaewon club case. And out of these, 90 people are the visitors, and the families, acquaintances, and friends of these people are 63. And the KCDC, we stress that anyone who visited any of the nightlife entertainment venues in Itaewon area, including any clubs or bars from 24th of April to 6th of May, we ask you to stay home and refrain from going outside, and contact a local public health center or dial 1339 and visit a screening clinic and get tested regardless of symptoms. And also, we emphasize that people who work in education, places of worship, indoor sports facilities, or other places that are used by many people should be also going to the health clinics as soon as possible to get tested. And if you test negative, you could also retest positive within 14 days. So if you are on self-quarantine, you need to keep this 14 days of self-quarantine. And also, even though you are not mandatory of the self-quarantine, you need to refrain from meeting other people and going outside, and also continue to wash your hands. And if you have symptoms in this period, please get tested again. In relation to the club cases and also the singing rooms and the private academies are some of the infection routes that are also transmitting, as we we see. And we also refrain you from having clusters or gatherings or meetings during the weekend. And if you have to go outside, please wear your face mask. Please refrain from handshaking. And please do not touch your face with contaminated hands. And please disinfect the area as well. In particular, as for the senior citizens who are aged over 65 and the pregnant people and those who have chronic illnesses who are in the high-risk group, we ask you to refrain from going to crowded and indoor places. If you have to visit these places, please wear your protective face masks. During the weekend, we want to refrain you from going to religious services, so we advise the use of online and non-face-to-face gatherings. And as if you have to gather physically, we also ask you to have physical distance, and wearing of your face mask is mandatory. And even please, we ask you to refrain from eating together and also the other activities that have high viral infection risks. And also, as for the clubs and bars which are enclosed spaces, if you have contact with many people and if you develop symptoms like fever and respiratory symptoms, also please contact the 1339 or visit the local public health center to get screened. And if more than 2 people from your family or from your community are tested positive, you also need to get tested as soon as possible. We are witnessing a fast spread of the coronavirus, and the infectious rate of coronavirus is very high, and we are seeing a widespread cluster infection that are carrying out. Right now, it's considered and concentrated in the indoor crowded spaces, including the private academies and singing rooms, as well as clubs and bars. So these are the places where there are many physical contacts in enclosed spaces. And in order to curb the further spread of the disease, we believe 2 essential measures are. First of them are to complying with personal hygiene measures, and second is keeping social distancing. And in order to prevent personal infection, you need to always wear your face mask and wash your hands. We highlight this many times, but this is a virus that is transmitted through droplets and through physical contact. So we believe that wearing of your face mask is very important, and washing your hands is also very crucial. And in order to decrease the risk of infection, you need to decrease the level of physical contact. So if you have large gatherings, this could increase the risk of infection. So refrain from going to clubs, bars, and other nightlife entertainment venues. And as for the religious services and academies, we also ask you to utilize the online services as well. And in relation to the club infection, we have been trying to trace down the patients and the contacts through a massive testing and massive contact tracing. So far, we have conducted over 14,000 cases of testings so far in relation to the Itaewon club. So if you have visited these areas and if you haven't been tested as of yet, please go to the public health centers right now, and please also get the screening testings as soon as possible. Thank you very much.
Right, that was Chung Young, the head of KCDC, with the afternoon briefing on COVID-19 here in Korea. Soa, to give a summary of the key announcements.
All right, Chung said that we have 27 new cases today, and out of those, 5 are imported cases and 22 are community transmissions. And out of these 22, 17 were related to the Itaewon club case. And earlier you mentioned that we had some 148 in total related to the club case. That number has been now updated to 153. country. And it looks like not only the Itaewon area, but also the Hongdae area, which is also a very populous area with young people. Infections have occurred there as well as people who had contacts with the earlier confirmed cases. And what Chung mentioned, she mentioned something very important today, that people who already tested negative for the virus can still test positive during that 14-day incubation period. So even if you went to a testing site and you tested negative, you still have to remain self-isolated for this 14-day period. And especially this weekend, because people are going to go to churches again, for instance, and to indoor facilities due to the relaxed social distancing measures. That's why the KCDC chief stressed again to abide by the everyday life quarantine measures.
All right, so thank you for that. We'll see you again on Monday.
Yes, see you.
Now, as a gesture of goodwill amid the global pandemic, Korea recently sent 500,000 face masks to war veterans in the U.S. In response, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo expressed his gratitude. Let's take a look at this video.
A special event was held on May 8th in Kimet Air Base. It was an event held to send face masks to Korean war veterans in 22 countries. The Korean War took place 7 decades ago on June 25, 1950, when North Korea made a surprise attack on the South. War veterans from 22 countries came to maintain peace on the Korean peninsula. Peace currently exists over the Korean peninsula thanks to the dedication and sacrifice of the war veterans. To express our gratitude to the war veterans, the Korean government and private organizations have come together to provide a total of 1 million face masks to them.
우리가 70여 년 전에 전쟁의 그 위기 속에 우리 처해 있는 대한민국을 위해서 위험을 무릅쓰고 참전해 주신 우리 참전 용사들의 그 투혼과 희생 정신 그리고 공헌에 보답하는 마음으로 우리 정부 차원에서 이번에 준비하게 된 것입니다.
Related personnel gathered at the Kimet Air Base on May 8th and they loaded face masks onto an Air Force aircraft. The largest aircraft in the Korean Air Force was used as there was a large quantity of masks.
장시간의 장거리 비행을 하는 동안 쉽지 않은 여정이 될 것으로 예상되지만 대한민국 공군 조종사로서 투철한 사명을 가지고 주어진 임무 완수에 최선을 다하겠습니다.
Over 90% of the war veterans are in the United States, so of the total, 500,000 face masks were first sent to the US.
우선적으로 필요한 분들, 그분들에게 전달을 하고 각 나라마다 정해진 그러니까 참전 용사 숫자나 아니면 필요나 이런 것들 이제 수요를 저희가 파악을 했기 때문에 그거에 따라서 보내드리려고 생각하고 있고.
Around 1.95 million UN war veterans from 22 nations sacrificed themselves and took part in the 3-year war 70 years ago. Out of them, it is estimated that about 400,000 war veterans are still alive. The war veterans sacrificed themselves to establish peace in a foreign land. We express our utmost gratitude to all the war veterans, and we will never forget their courage, dedication, and sacrifice.
Man's activities have been brought to a standstill in light of the pandemic worldwide, and the reality appears, but this reality nonetheless appears to be having an interesting impact on his environment. For more on this, I have Chang-Da-eul, an advocacy specialist for Greenpeace East Asia, Seoul. Welcome to the program, Mr. Chang.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And I also have Jason Strotter, a freelance journalist. Hello, good to see you again, Jason.
Good to see you again.
Mr. Chang, there are some experts who believe that the cause of COVID-19 is the destruction of the ecosystem due to environmental damage. What are your thoughts on this?
I agree with that statement because according to the veterinary sciences, most of the infectious diseases happened in the last 80 years are zoonotic diseases from the animals. And out of all the zoonotic diseases in the last 80 years, around like 70% were from wild animals. So because of the deforestation and ecosystem destruction by the development activities and extreme weather events like flood, wildfires, push the wild animals kick out from their habitats and increase the contacts between the wild animals and the human beings. So this is one of the reasons why the zoonotic diseases like COVID-19 and Ebola or other diseases came up in the last decade. So.
I see. Jason, it appears that nature is making a recovery as man's activities have been halted. What are some of the changes that are taking place in the ecosystem?
There's these anecdotal stories about goats taking over a town in Wales. In New York City, which is, noise levels are often intolerable. You hear birds chirping in the morning. So you have a lot of these cases where, wild animals are now kind of taking over public spaces that ordinarily they would have been scared to go venture into because of human occupation. But now that everyone is sheltering in place in much of the world, it seems like these animals are, taking the land back. But let's see for how much longer.
I see. I'm not sure about birds singing, but I am sure that the clouds here in Seoul have been much clearer and much more blue, if I may say. The air quality, it is improving then, Mr. Chang?
Recently, according to the Ministry of Environment, the PM2.5 pollution in February and March got decreased by 30% compared to the same time in last year. But not all of that because of the COVID-19 lockdown, but around 1/3 of the improvement was due to the lockdown by the COVID-19.
Now, it is known that the main cause for extreme weather is global warming caused by carbon dioxide. And well, given the lockdown measures in place to combat COVID-19, fewer carbon footprints have been recorded. For more on this, I have Professor Kim Yeon-sung from George Mason University. Thank you for joining us live, Professor Kim.
Thank you for having me.
Now, before we talk about carbon footprints, I'd like to touch upon yet another concern in the US. I understand officials there are grappling with garbage issues at the beach as quarantine measures have been eased. How severe is that problem?
So in some coastal states, beach has reopened, and then based upon the much consideration and controversial debate, and people are welcomed about the reopening of the beaches, and particularly local residents really enjoyed the news and expectation that they can enjoy the fresh air as well as they can go to outside. However, as a repercussion, there is a local news reporting the surges of trashes in beaches. For instance, last Saturday and Sunday, after Mother's Day weekend, over 13,000 pounds of garbage was thrown away to Cocoa Beach in Florida. So this is about 5 times more garbage collected than before beaches shut down due to coronavirus fears. In response, the local government decided to strengthen enforcement actions of waste laws, and particularly invoking collaboration from the park enforcement specialists as well as volunteers from non-profit organizations. I think as we will continue to open the beaches, the situation might get better.
I see. Professor Kim, findings also show that the quantity of carbon emission fell whenever the global community faced a crisis. What is it like right now in light of COVID-19?
Yes, so coronavirus has cut emissions far greater than much of long discussions, in particular the international climate negotiations since 1995, when UNFCCC, which is United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change negotiations, had launched. So according to International Energy Agency's recent publication, Global Energy Review 2020, global greenhouse gas emissions this year are expected to decline by roughly 8%, or almost around 2.6 gigatons of emission decline from last year. Such a reduction would be the largest ever since the World War II or any type of the economic downturns. So the projected annual drop in emissions would be 6 times larger than decline in the 2009 global financial crisis. As another example, China's carbon emissions decline is a very interesting case. And we heard that last March, China showed sharp decline in carbon dioxide emissions around by 25% decline as compared to prior year within 1 month. These two dramatic the declines in carbon dioxide emissions really illustrate and reconfirm the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's claim that humans are the main cause of the climate change and greenhouse gas effects.
I see. Then, Professor Kim, which of our inactivity, so to speak, had the greatest impact on the reduction of carbon footprints worldwide, do you think?
So global greenhouse gas emissions can be broken into by economic sectors. So if we see the proportion of emissions based upon industrial sectors and transportation sector, also electricity generation and utility sector. So there is the statistic saying that industry takes account of 21% of greenhouse gases emitted in 2010. The transportation sector is 14%, while electricity generation based on fossil fuel, coal, natural gas, oil takes account of around 25%, so which is the single largest source. But due to coronavirus, we saw huge drops in economic activities that are relying on fossil fuel-based electricity generation. And interestingly, 4 billion people right now in the world are under the partial or complete quarantine and the shutdowns of economic activities, so that energy consumption has been heavily declined. So in the countries where the full, very complete, extensive way of quarantine or lockdown and economic shutdown, there is around 25% of energy demand decrease. While the partial quarantine areas and countries, there is around 18% of decline in energy consumption, energy demand. They really illustrate that the greenhouse gases emitted from the electricity generation declined. Also, interestingly, the aviation and tourism and travel sectors, these are the industrial sectors that also showed the decline in greenhouse gases.
Now, despite these current favorable numbers, that is with regard to pollution, there is a concern that the greenhouse gas emissions will surge once the virus is contained. What efforts are needed to address this concern, Professor Kim?
So, yes, there is some prediction that the pandemic crisis subsides, as well as the nations try to reopen their economies. We cannot avoid the surge in the greenhouse gases emissions. So under that situation and assumption, I would like to suggest and recommend or consider 4 different pathways we might consider. The first one is that the national governments, as an international society, particularly, they can put clean energy at the heart of economic stimulus packages as part of economic recovery efforts. So there is an interesting case study related to the 2009 economic stimulus package adopted by Obama administration, under which the clean energy research as well as utility scale wind farm and solar farm generation was heavily subsidized and incentivized, through which for the past decade, the United States have increased the wind power-based electricity generation. Likewise, I think this is a great opportunity for national government to really reshape their energy, the infrastructure and energy landscape. The second measure we might think about is that we want to keep the positive things we adopted so far in our current system. So which means that we based upon the current corona situation, we adopted measures such as video conferencing or the working from home or staggering office hours that could reduce the traffic and road congestion that can be related to the climate mitigation and greenhouse gas reductions. So we might really continually push forward slower and high quality growth in a way to accommodate the current situation. The third thing is that we should really harness and leverage the innovative powers of the private sectors. So we might really see the plastics or the petroleum-based the plastics consumptions increase. We cannot avoid it for the sake of public safety issues. So then we might rely on bioengineering or different material selections from the industries based upon the innovative some research as well as efforts. Lastly, I would highly recommend that each individual try to really reflect their consumption patterns and production activity in consideration of others' welfare as well as the ecosystem health. So the one China's bad case and the current corona pandemic virus situation really illustrate that each one's little action might be inducing the ripple effects, because the worldwide we are so highly connected as well as our the kind of the interconnection cannot be really disconnected.
Yes,
so
of course.
we try to really limit our consumption as well as consider others' welfare ahead of my own economic utility.
Right,
only.
those are some great words right there. Right, Professor Kim, thank you so much for making the time and for joining us live at this hour.
Thank you for having me.
Mr. Zhang, just as our Professor Kim mentioned, COVID-19 is maybe threatening our livelihood, but it is doing wonders for nature, that is, given our inactivity, so to speak. What do you think about this?
Well, first of all, the nature condition is improving because of the lockdown due to the COVID-19, but actually the climate change is not the same case. We can only mitigate the climate crisis, but we cannot go back to the past, even with this COVID-19 situation. And also, it's good that people think that, if once we stop our economic activities, then our environment gets better. It can give a wrong signal to the people that in order to enjoy our economic development, in order to enjoy the quality of our life, it is inevitable to destroy the environment. So what I'm saying is that we shouldn't look at this as the paradox, but actually there is a way to enjoy the quality of life in terms of better environment, but at the same time, we can enjoy the sustainable development. For example, I came to the studio today with an electric car. Still, I can use the transport service with my electric car without emitting a lot of air pollution to the atmosphere and also contributing to the mitigation of the climate change. But at the same time, I still enjoy the mobility with the electric car. Doesn't contribute to the worsening the climate change or the air pollution. And there are a number of ways, like the Professor Kim said, that we can use more renewables. Then when we use the power generation from the fossil fuel, then the climate crisis is getting worse. But we can use the electricity from the renewable sources like solar power and wind power. We can still pursue the sustainable development, but also at the same time, we can improve our quality of life. And we can also survive in this climate crisis. So we should look at the situation right now that we need to develop further how to enjoy the quality of life, how to survive from the climate crisis, but at the same time, we can still enjoy our development activities. So I think that's the better way to look at the situation.
Jason, how do you regard the situation?
Well, yeah, we're at a unique time, and whenever there's a crisis, there is opportunity. But I think that's going to reflect the political will of the political leadership in every country. So still, we're, maybe at the end of the beginning, pretty much, of the COVID-19 pandemic. So there's still a lot of room, a lot of time to see how governments react in terms of climate change policy, environmental policy, vis-a-vis the pandemic.
Mr. Zhang, you talked about ways of continued improvement of our nature as we also engage in activities for our society. And the government has proposed a way of doing this with a green approach, so to speak. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Well, first of all, the ruling Democratic Party came up with the Green New Deal as a election manifesto for the last election in April. And the Green New Deal discussion in South Korea has started since the impact from the discussion in the US or in Europe. So last year, Justice Party came up with the Green New Deal idea. And again, the ruling Democratic Party came up with the idea. So there is a vast interest in the society on Green New Deal as the major focus for the economic stimulus for the post-corona situation. But the administration hasn't come up with the Green New Deal. The President Moon asked the Minister of Environment and Minister of Land Infrastructure and Transport and Minister of SMEs and Startups and Minister of Environment. He asked these four ministries to make a joint presentation on how to include the Green New Deal as part of the Korean New Deal, the Vice Prime Minister announced last week. So the discussion just started. And there is a huge interest from the rest of the world as well as the foreign media on how Korea deal with this Green New Deal idea, with this post-corona situation. So it has been just started. So I'm not very pessimistic, but at the same time, I'm not very optimistic because the discussion just started and we need to see how this discussion goes. And also the participation from the industries, civil society, and people in this discussion is very important.
I see. So it's very in its early stages then?
Yes, it's very early stage.
I see. And despite that, this interest in a green approach here in Korea has apparently renewed interest in the Green New Deal in the European Union, Jason.
Right. Well, I mean, the European Union was making some headway even prior to Korea's announcement that they were trying to seek out some sort of environmental programs such as this Green New Deal. I think in Europe, the EU basically started putting together their plan at the end of last year. And I think the EU is in a good position to make some of these incremental changes that could mitigate the effects of climate change. I think in the U.S. it's a different story. Even though the U.S. House of Representatives, some lawmakers introduced legislation for their Green New Deal, it's pretty much dead in the water. That bill probably wouldn't pass in the democratically controlled House, certainly wouldn't pass in the Republican-controlled Senate, which would need to pass the legislation. And under the Trump administration, no way is that going to happen. But not even Joe Biden, the presumptive Democratic nominee for president, not even he has fully signed on the Green New Deal in the U.S.
And here in Korea, Mr. Chang, is it true that there is a study that has looked into the possible effects of this green approach on Korea?
Well, there was a study in the U.S. by the Stanford University and UC Berkeley, led by the Professor Mark Jacobson, that actually it wasn't only about Korea, but it included many developed countries, including Korea. So in terms of the Korean version of the report, it recommends that if Korea invests like $1.9 trillion until 2050 in order to achieve the 100% renewables for the energy system, and also invest on the energy efficiency, invest on the buildings and infrastructures, then actually around 1.4 million jobs could be created, even deducted for the jobs disappeared by this transition. And the benefits from this Green New Deal could be way bigger than the cost it actually required. So traditionally, people see that the idea like a Green New Deal as a pure environmental policy. But actually, it's not an environmental policy from the narrow focus. It's a way bigger set of policies to achieve the systematic changes. And the benefits of the policies could be way, way bigger than people can expect, as proven by the research.
Mr. Chang, if I'm not mistaken, coal accounts for more than half of Korea's energy sources. And if this is the case, what measures should be taken to allow for a gradual transition, should I say, into green growth?
Right now, the coal takes about 35% to 40% of the power generation. And also another fossil fuel, natural gas, also takes 20%. So bring coal and gas together around 65% of our power generation at the moment. And the share of the renewables is about 4% at the moment. One of the lowest, actually the lowest among the OECD countries. So it's not easy to transform the Korean energy system right away into 100% renewables. But actually, this is not an option, but it's the way we have to follow in order to meet the global climate crisis. And also from the economic point of view, for example, as Europe came up with a Green Deal, they are also thinking of implementing the carbon border tax, meaning that those imported goods from the countries like Korea, if we use a lot of fossil fuels and there is no strong carbon regulation, then actually they can put more tax on it. So it will hugely affect on our economy. So this is not an option, but we have to choose to survive.
I see. Jason, one last very brief question. On a different note, one environmental repercussion of COVID-19 is the increase in waste of medical waste and disposable waste. Medical waste including face masks, of course. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I mean, I think we saw in Wuhan, I think during the initial stages of the pandemic, they produced something like 6 times more medical waste. The United Nations Environmental Program has put out protocols for how countries can better dispose of their medical waste. But I think even at an individual level, there's something people can do. I mean, for instance, I stopped using disposable face masks, and now I have a set of reusable ones. So I think there's like little steps that people can take.
Baby steps that we could take.
Exactly.
I see. All right, Jason, thank you very much for your thoughts. And Mr. Chang, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, and that brings us to the end of this week's edition of COVID-19. Health authorities believe this weekend will prove to be of much importance as it offers them a better gauge of the cluster infection triggered by the Itaewon outbreak. In the meantime, do stay safe by practicing good personal hygiene, wearing a face mask and avoiding crowded and confined spaces. Also, do reach out to us on our social media accounts or our homepage, arirang.com. See you on Monday.